I think most Cape Codders are really starting to see that there's a sense of urgency and climate change isn't going away, and that's something that we really do need to address. And most Cape Codders are impacted by water. We're surrounded by water, and so they can see those changes in our coastline, and they can really see the visible effects of climate change and our coastal erosion and our coastal resources being impacted. We certainly need to continue to advocate for more resources for our local communities, for our local businesses. They will be impacted by this. If it's not by climate change overall, if there's a significant flooding event that cuts off certain businesses from being able to open because of an infrastructure issue or roadways that are closed, certainly we need to make sure that there are plans in place for our communities and our businesses to adapt, but making sure that we've got the resources too, so that they can look to become more resilient and they can look to potentially reopen when it becomes possible. And so we want to make sure that those impacts are less than they would have been otherwise. We've learned a lot from the pandemic, even about how our local businesses are resilient. Cape Codders are resilient, but we do need to continue to advocate for resources, and we want to make sure that Cape Cod isn't forgotten. And we are more vulnerable than many other areas, and so identifying that using relevant data and facts and information continues to be important, and it continues to be a great place for the Climate Collaborative to continue to advocate for Cape Cod. So after a very long, intensive effort to develop a climate action plan for Cape Cod, we were extremely pleased to have so many stakeholders engaged in the process. And in July, the Cape Cod Commission approved the first ever climate action plan for Cape Cod. The Cape Cod Commission was formed back in 1989. The legislation that enabled the Cape Cod Commission, the Cape Cod Commission Act, was signed into law in 1990, really as a result of an unprecedented growth boom in the region. And so the Cape Cod Commission was established. We're the regional planning agency for the region of Cape Cod, all 15 towns on the Cape. And we've got that regulatory authority that allows us to take a look at certain development proposals. One of the first components of the Climate Action Plan was the development of an economic analysis. And it was important for us to be able to share with people what would happen if we were to take no further action as a region to address climate change. And so taking a look at those economic numbers, for example, we may see significant losses of building and property if we were to just let sea level rise continue and we were to let flooding events continue without actually taking any preventative measures or mitigation measures. And so looking at the different types of mitigation and adaptation strategies is important. So identifying some of those economic components was key up front to really getting people to understand why they need to change their behavior. Part of the planning process really was making sure that we pulled all of the stakeholders across the region together. Many times climate change conversations can be one-sided and can be primarily led by environmental advocates, and so it was very important for us to make sure that the housing community had a seat at the table, that the environmental community, the business community, looking at the real estate community and a variety of other stakeholders. And so we structured our stakeholder outreach process around some of our highest emitting sectors. So we had many players engaged talking about the transportation sector, the built environment, really talking about our natural resources, and then the community and looking at our housing strategies. Not only do we have a climate change crisis, but we have a housing crisis at the same time. And so making sure that we're able to address our housing crisis without putting too many additional demands on that sector was important. So we developed this strategies database. So there's a matrix now of different strategies that can be implemented and adopted at a variety of levels. So we're pleased now that we can move forward with implementation. I think that the hard work was developing the plan, but I think the hardest part now is going to actually be implementing the strategies and coordinating with our partners at the federal and state and municipal level to make sure that some of the strategies are adopted and implemented. And so once we've got some of that established and people are really understanding that this is real and these realities are coming sooner than I think anyone had really anticipated, that's really starting to drive the conversation. So once you can take that environmental conversation and really tie it to economics, you've got a different conversation with the general public. We have a housing crisis at the same time, and so making sure that we're able to address our housing crisis without putting too many additional demands on that sector was important. So looking at that balance, so bringing those stakeholders together was important. Not always easy. There's certainly challenges when you bring all of those stakeholders together to have the same conversation and to try to build consensus. But it was really important to make sure we had all those people at the table so that we could develop a plan that we can now move forward and implement collectively as a region. The climate action plan needs to be implemented by a variety of actors. So the way we were able to develop and put the plan together was really identifying those different actors at the different levels. So there's actors at the nonprofit level, the business level, even the individuals in the community, all the way up through the municipal, regional, state, and even federal government. So there will be a variety of actors and actions that need to take place over the course of the next several years, of course, looking at that short-term strategy and then even longer term. We were very careful to make sure that we are consistent with the Commonwealth's framework, so making sure that our efforts are aligned with what the state's doing. And the state administration has been have been very innovative, and they've been very forward-thinking in terms of their greenhouse gas goals, emissions goals for reduction. And so making sure that we're aligned here, but that we also take into account that Cape Cod is unique. And I find that many of our stakeholders are really invested in the region, and they want to keep Cape Cod a special place. And so kind of going back to the Cape Cod Commission's mission, it's really quite simple. It's just to keep a special place special. And so I do feel like many of our stakeholders are invested in the community, and they're invested in responsible growth and making sure that as we continue growing as a region, we're also managing our environment and making sure that our resources that make us so unique are being protected.